Okay, so we're holding Pirkei Avot, Pirkei, Mishnah Tet. Some have it as a separate Mishnah. In other words, Mishnah Tet consists of two parts. Last week we did the first portion. Various calamities occur in the world as a result of all kinds of sins. Actually, that was Mishnah Het. Seven kinds of calamities affect the world as a result of all kinds of gufei avera, all kinds of major sins. In Mishnah Tet, the Mishnah reads that there are some additional unusual events, let's call them, that occur to the world as a result of certain sins. So some, I guess, put it together as one long Mishnah, and here it is a separate Mishnah. So we're going to begin with Hayara'a Ba'al Ha'olam, wild animals, wild beasts. People are killed, people are bitten, whether it's rabies, whether it's poison, whether they're mauled, injured, and so forth. Any attack by a wild animal is definitely a shlichut mishamayim. It's from shamayim, it's from heaven. And the reason why an attack by an animal is directly from heaven is because animals don't have free will. When an animal attacks, the rabbis tell us it's because the human being appears to him as an animal. So how is that from heaven? It appears, it wants lunch, it wants dinner, it's hungry. So there's two parts to it. The human being was created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. And because of that, the Torah tells us that the animal ordinarily should be afraid of the human being, because of that tselem Elokim, the image of God. But sometimes people conduct themselves like animals, or worse, so they remove from themselves the tselem Elokim. As a result of that, the human being appears as another animal. And when the human being appears as another animal, a shark says, "Oh, there's my lunch," and it attacks and bites. And after the first bite, it realizes, "Oh no, this doesn't taste like what I'm used to." Then it lets go. But the problem is, after it lets go, the bite was so strong, so much blood loss, that many times people die from being bitten by sharks. And the same is true with other animals too. They will only attack if the human being does not have the image of God on him. Many tzaddikim, there have been stories of being thrown into the lion's den. Lions that were hungry, not fed for a while. It was a tzaddik, they didn't touch him. So everybody thought, what a miracle. Daniel is a famous one, right? Daniel being thrown to the Gov Harayot. So even though, of course, it's miraculous, the reality is that there's no need to say that it's a miracle. He had the tselem Elokim on him. Why should the animal, why should the lion attack him? He's afraid of him. This is not part of his diet. So, a wild beast, because it sees the human being as being just another ordinary animal, it doesn't have any fear for him. That's what happens. So, depending, of course, on what the person does, we will see the midah keneged midah, the punishment that is measure for measure, is a wild animal. So we will discuss why that is. In other words, what's the connection? Why does it have to be a wild animal attacking him? As opposed to what we said last week, there could be pestilence, plagues, all kinds of other diseases, I should say, all kinds of diseases that affect or come about as a result of all kinds of sins. So what's this wild animal all about? So we began to say that animals don't have free will. And the only time they will attack you is either you step on them, you actually start up with them, right? Or it's a mission from Shamayim. In other words, it's a shlichut. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent the animal. And when the animal sees that human being just an ordinary animal, was just like any other animal, it has no fear for him. So, why would an animal attack? So, one of the items that are listed here is Shvuat Shav. There's several of them, but one of them is Shvuat Shav. Shvuat Shav means swearing in vain, using God's name. We know that that is a very, very serious offense, serious sin, to swear. Even if you're swearing on the emet, even if it's the truth, one should avoid it at all costs. It's a very serious act to swear. To swear here meaning to take the oath and using God's name. And if it's shav, shvuat shav, that means it's completely false and vain. It's terrible. So what's so serious about it? Shavuah, when we make an oath, when we swear, we're obviously giving tremendous credence and weight to the koach hadibur, to our speech. We're asking people to trust us, to rely on what we're saying, that we're saying the truth. And we don't demonstrate it in any way, we don't prove it. Take my word for it. And it's not just my word, I'm swearing, I'm taking making an oath, using God's name, that which is the most holy to me. Right? So that dibur, that speech has tremendous weight, tremendous value. And if it turns out to be that it's completely false and I use God's name, it's a tremendous zilzul, tremendous lack of respect, disrespect for God. And disrespect for the speech, for that koach that is special to human beings that we receive that animals don't have. That is one of the things that differentiates, one of the main things that differentiates man from animal. That we have the koach hadibur, we're able to speak, we're able to communicate. So people don't realize that speech is very, very delicate. Lashon hara is not only damage, was giving somebody a bad reputation, gossiping, right? It's not only the damage that is being done to other individual, it's actually a pgam in the koach hadibur. We are actually contaminating the speech, which is a beautiful, very special gift that man received. And when we contaminate or cause our speech to become defective, we're worse than animals who don't have the koach hadibur. So therefore, it's the animal that comes and says, oh, you're no longer a human being, you're no longer special. Look what you did with that koach hadibur, you misused it. You were disrespectful of God. That means you don't have the tzelem Elokim on you either. Because somebody who has a tzelem Elokim, he realizes what he has. He values it, he respects it. One who does not, that means he loses it. So he's losing his tzelem Elokim, plus he's contaminating that special gift, it's called koach hadibur. Therefore, it's an animal that's going to attack him, for he no longer represents the crown of creation, the human being. That was the first one, Shvuat Shav. What else? Al Chilul Hashem. The next one is Chilul Hashem. Chilul Hashem is, we know, one of the worst sins that there is. It means to desecrate God's name. How do you desecrate? What was done that desecrates Hashem? I mean, any transgression, in a sense, is a desecration. There's two kinds, basically, of Chilul Hashem. One is to do something in public, intentionally, without regard whatsoever to the kavod of Hashem. In other words, by the way that it's done, it manifests a complete disregard for the kavod of Hashem, for the honor of God. The particular transgression is usually a very serious offense that is so contradictory to anything that we know this man to be, that is so rare or so not common or just so terrible, and especially in public, that the impression that it leaves is a desecration of the kavod of Hashem through this terrible maaseh, through this terrible deed, through this terrible transgression. Another type of Chilul Hashem is when people learn from this terrible maaseh, from this terrible deed. They learn the wrong things. So that too, that the fact that this is influencing or causing others to learn the wrong ideas, the wrong things, is also Chilul Hashem. Chilul Hashem is something very difficult to repair. It's something that has been done, something that has left its mark in people, in the world, and therefore difficult to remove that stain that has just been brought upon the community, that part of the world. So what happens with Chilul Hashem? When a Chas v'Shalom, this happens, it shows that his morah, his fear for God is lacking. How could somebody go so openly, b'shat nefesh, as we say in Hebrew, so openly, so brazenly against the Torah, against God? You know, something that is obvious, something that he doesn't care. Not that he did it unintentionally or unknowingly. No, he knows. He's aware and still does it. And he does it with the wrong, you know, with the bad intention. So this shows, obviously, that he lacks any morah, any fear for God. So now you understand? In the same way that he lacks the fear for God, the animals will lack the fear for him. The fear that they're naturally supposed to have will be gone. So there's always a midah keneged midah, as we've explained many times. There's always a measure for measure. And doing something against Hashem in such an open way, without any regard for anything, is a tremendous avon. You know, it's one thing to do it privately. It's one thing to do it because you were hungry and you did something. In other words, one succumbed to his yetzer, to his evil inclination. But to knowingly do something that is terrible in public, especially, very, very, very serious avon. And I don't know if this is the only thing that will be a midah keneged midah for him. There may be other things that Hashem could send to atone for this, or to, if we want to use the word punishment, I guess you could use it here too. Especially if this is an avon, a sin that is affecting the entire community. It could be that there are other measures that have to be taken other than just hayara'ah, right? But this is an example of a particular situation where you wonder why are the animals going crazy? Or why are so many kids being bitten? You know, it doesn't have to be adults. And there's all kinds of hayot. You know, haya, we think of haya as an animal that walks on four, but there's some hayot that walk on two. Yeah. And it could be, again, it's not that it's vague, it's pretty clear. Haya usually means animals, but it could be that Hashem has other ways of expanding this particular measure for measure by bringing about other things too. So this is for Shvuat Shav and Chilul Hashem. And we said that the common denominator really here is the lack of fear. That he shows the lack of respect, the lack of fear, and as a result of that, he loses the Tzelem Elokim from himself. Animals have no fear for him. Next, Galut Ba'al Haolam. Galut means exile. When people read this Mishnah, they learn this Mishnah and they come across the word Galut, they think about exile. They think about the diaspora. Galut, it says. They don't realize that Galut is a bigger word than just exile and diaspora. And the best way to understand Galut is by reading the news of what's happening today in Syria. What happens today in Syria? I'm not talking about the bombing, not talking about the killing. I'm talking about something that people perhaps totally forgot about. You know how many hundreds of thousands of refugees there are? You know what refugees are? When there's war, a war zone, it's dangerous to stay behind. They have to leave their homes. They have to leave their possessions. They have to go live in a tent for who knows how long. In the cold, in the rain, terrible conditions. Refugees. That's Galut. So Galut Ba'al Haolam. Why is this coming to them? Why is this affecting them? I'm not necessarily going to talk about the Syrians, but in general, why is there Galut? And why is there especially Galut for Am Yisrael more than anybody else? So that's the question here. So even though Galut is in general something that affects all of humanity, because it says Galut Ba'al Haolam, it must be affecting all of humanity in the form of refugees and so forth, people having to move. Right? There could be, by the way, you know, when there's major fires and homes are destroyed, people are moving. People can't be in their homes until it's rebuilt. That's also a form of Galut. Storms, out of their home. Homes is broken, so they are in Galut. So all kinds of galuyot come as a result of alovdei avodah zarah, vel gilui arayot, vel shfichat damim, vel hashmatat haaretz. Because of four things that are happening. Either idol worshipping, either gilui arayot, which I guess in English we can translate immorality, immoral acts of all kinds, murder, shfichat damim, and al hashmatat haaretz, because in Israel, for some reason, the Jewish people decided not to observe the mitzvah of Shemitah. And I'll come back and explain how that works. So here, what do we see so far? That these are terrible sins, that as a result of them, it causes galut. People are exiled from their homes. The first three, Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayot, and Shfichat Damim, actually happen to be the three sins for which the first temple was destroyed. Bait Rishon Nechrav, al she'avru, because they transgressed. Gilui Arayot, Avodah Zarah, and Shfichut Damim. All three major cardinal sins. Why are they called cardinal sins? Because these are the three that the rabbis tell us, Yehareg ve'al yavor. If a Jew is put to the wall with a gun, do one of these three, if now we kill you, he has to let himself be killed. These are cardinal sins. There are other situations where you have to let yourself be killed too, but these are for the most part the major three, regardless of whether it's in private quarters. It doesn't have to be public, even though nobody else sees. No, you can't do them. So we know that they're serious. So we have to explain why each one is so serious. But before we explain the severity of each one, we need to understand that when Galut affects the Jewish people, what it means is that Eretz Israel, Meki'ah, as the Torah says, that's the language that Torah uses, vomits the people who commit these transgressions. So, on top of the fact that these three are so serious that they bring about Galut, Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, is a sensitive land. Not Mongolia, not Chile, and not Canada. We're talking about Eretz Israel is a sensitive place. The holiness there brings a certain sensitivity that the land cannot tolerate for long. Any kinds of things that are wrong, blatantly wrong against the Torah. Especially if these are the cardinal sins. And the Torah therefore warns us before we get there, or as we're about to enter, that be careful that you don't live or conduct yourself like the Goyim who were there before you. After all, Hashem is removing them from the land, not because you're better, not because you deserve it, not even though Hashem promised to give us that, but because they don't deserve it to live there. They basically merited being kicked out because of their ma'asim, not because we're coming, we need room. No, that was another issue. That was another point, that we're coming and we need to settle the land, fine. But why are these nations being thrown out, the 7 nations? Because they contaminated the land. And because they contaminated it with, there was tum'ah, because of their various ma'asim that the Torah, of course, forbids, don't repeat what they did. Don't copy them. Don't learn from their ways. Otherwise, the same will happen to you. So in order for us to be able to stay in the land permanently, we have to be careful, obviously, with what we do. Not just because of our relationship with Hashem, but because we want to stay in the land. So we see from this that Galut, especially for Jews from Eretz Israel, we're not talking about Galut from Jews from Spain. They were kicked out or had to leave. That's also Galut, but that's a slightly different reason perhaps. Right? Here we're talking about the Galut of Am Yisrael from Eretz Israel. That has to do with the sensitivity of the land, especially to this kind of sins. Now what happens when a Jew goes into Galut? The hashgacha of God on him, the divine providence on him, is different. It's not as much felt as it is in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, the Torah says, Einei Hashem ba, the eyes of Hashem are constantly watching over her. Eretz Yisrael, the land of Eretz Yisrael, has a different kind of relationship with nature. It's not just the laws of nature that govern whether it will have rain or not. Hashem decides. Hashem pushes the button. Whereas everywhere else in the world, there's rules of nature. Of course Hashem can push buttons there too, and He does. But Eretz Yisrael is completely programmed, you can say, like a computer, customized according to Am Yisrael's conduct. If they're good, things turn out beautiful. The fruit, the rain, prosperity, no wars, quiet, tranquility, everything would be nice. Why not? What's holding it back? Eretz Avat Halav Udvash, the Torah says, it flows with milk and honey. It has everything. It has desert, it has snow, it has ocean. Right? It has everything. Now they're finding that there's a lot of oil and gas there too. Baruch Hashem. But if Am Yisrael does not conduct itself, the Torah already warns us what's going to happen. The opposite. Not only will we not have all the blessing, we will be kicked out. Kicked out of that land because the land is sensitive. So we need to understand before we talk about each one separately, as to why the Jewish people more than anybody else goes into exile. You look at other countries that were conquered, many countries, for the most part, the people remained there. They were just taken over. Were they kicked out? No. Were the Germans kicked out of Germany after World War II by the Allies? No. They conquered them. They split East Germany and West Germany perhaps, but they didn't throw them out. Right? Same thing with Poland. I mean, you had Germany, you had Russia, conquer Poland, take over Poland. Did they kick out the Polish? No. You look around many countries that were taken over, they were not kicked out. Am Yisrael is kicked out. It's strange, isn't it? Take over, fine, we'll pay your taxes. And that happened too. But why kicked out? That's galut. That's obviously Mishamayim. The Torah says it will happen. So why does Am Yisrael why does it get kicked out more than anyone else? So I saw a beautiful mashal from the Maggid of Kelm. Rabbi who lived a little over 100 years ago, who says like this: there was once a wealthy man that wanted to marry off his daughter. He lived in a town, and Baruch Hashem, he was doing very well, and he was able to afford to invite the whole town to the wedding. Imagine, the whole town comes to his wedding. But he realized that in this town there's three kinds of people. There's the wealthy, there's the middle class, and there are the poor. So he's not going to give them all the same menu, because each one is used to something else. So for the rich, he put out tables with place cards, right? So they know where to sit. And he served them steak with champagne. That's what they're doing. They appreciate it, they like it, and they'll enjoy it. The middle class, he served chicken and wine. And to the poor, he gave them herring and beer. Because that's what they like. That's what they enjoy. They're used to that. In the crowd of the rich, there was one guy who had recently become rich. He was poor for many years, and recently he had become rich. So where was he sitting? With the rich. But as he's sitting down, he's not eating his steak and not drinking his champagne. He's looking all the time at the table of the poor. He wants that herring. He wants the beer and he wants it. That's what he's used to. He loves that food. So he didn't touch his food. So he couldn't take it. After a while, he was looking, he just couldn't take it. He went over there and grabbed a plate of herring and some beer and brought it to his place. So the host went over to him and said, Yankel, if that was his name, I don't understand. You're sitting amongst the rich. You should be eating like the rich. And here, you're taking the food from the food that the poor are going to eat. It doesn't. Zelo matim lecha. In other words, it doesn't befit you. But what? I figured after a while, I figured it out, and you probably just are so used to that food that you just couldn't control yourself. So I figured that's where you ran over, right? I could have done it for you too. I could have brought you, if you asked, I would have brought you a plate of herring if you're so much still stuck with, that kind of food. But Yankov, I don't understand. If you so much like that food, why don't you just go ahead and sit there too? Why are you sitting here? If you sit here, then behave yourself like the rich. If you so much like that food, then perhaps you should be sitting there. So the Maggid of Kelm says, Am Yisrael has become rich, right? And he's supposed to conduct himself like a wealthy, like we're wealthy, in other words, like we have everything that we're supposed to have. And here we want to cheapen ourselves and eat the herring and the beer that belongs to other nations. In other words, the avodah zarah, the idol worshipping and all that. You want to lower your status? Then why don't you go live in those countries that have avodah zarah? Follow me? If you're so much like that, then you don't belong here. This is the place for the rich, spiritually rich. Well, even material too. You want to stay here, then you have to behave like the land expects you to behave. You want to eat the herring and drink the beer, then go to those countries where they serve that. Why bring it here? So you see, that's the idea. Am Yisrael is being told, you want this stuff? This belongs to the Goyim. They go fetch it there and live there. So therefore, they're kicked out. They're kicked out for idol worshipping. Go to those countries where they worship idols and get a taste for it. I thought it was a nice mashal. When Chaz v'Shalom, Am Yisrael worships idols like they did during the first temple era, what happens automatically is a complete detachment from faith in God, because that's what Avodah Zarah is. It's not compatible, right? It's complete opposite. So by worshiping idols, perhaps we did mention it. The galut that comes on Am Yisrael comes for either one of the three: Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arot, or Shlichut Avim. So the Avodah Zarah portion, in other words, if that is the main problem affecting the Jewish nation, it shows that they have become disconnected from God. So by being disconnected from God, Hashem says, well, since you disconnected yourself from me, you're going to be disconnected from the land too. Because it's all one package, right? You accepted me, you accepted my mitzvot, and I gave you this land. It's all a package deal. You sever your connection with me, you sever your connection with the land. So that explains partially why galut will occur, not as refugees necessarily, but being kicked out of Eretz Yisrael, which also happens to be a very sensitive land. Now, what happens when the Jew is finally in galut? As we said earlier, the hashgacha on him is less. It's not the same as it is in Eretz Yisrael. Outside of Israel, here in Los Angeles, it's not the same. There's still a divine providence over the world, but not as strong as in Israel, not as focused. So when the Jew is outside, he is subjected to the whims of the Goyim. If they're anti-Semitic, he suffers. If they're nice to him, then he's lucky. And then, only then, after a while, if things are really tough, only then he will realize, wow, now I understand. As the Torah says, at some point in time when you're really, really suffering in the non-Jewish world, you will realize, oh, it's because God is not with me. I want to go back home. It was much better there. And hopefully that's what the Jews of America will say so too. Let's go there. There is better than here. I don't think too many are saying that yet. But soon they're going to say it. So, outside of Israel, the Hashgacha is much less on the Jew. And he will feel it at some point. Something is missing. And that feeling, of course, is also directed from upstairs that he should at some point awaken himself. So the pressure is on him to feel and to come to that conclusion. It's not that Hashem's going to say, okay, you're going to stay out of Israel for 2,000 years. It's not that we can't do anything about it. We could do something about it. We have to realize at some point, we don't belong here. We need to be there. What are we doing here? Oh, we were kicked out. Oh, I forgot all about it. I thought this is the promised country, right? Go west. All kinds of things, become rich. No, that's not the reason we're here or in South Africa or in South America. We're all in all these places because we are in Galut, and we still are in Galut. We're not necessarily being burnt at the stake, we don't have the challenges of the past, but this is still Galut. So Hashem wants us to realize that this is Galut, so sometimes He reminds us. Look at the Arab lands, except for Morocco, which is now also not 100% stable with the Jews, but most of the Arab countries kicked out their Jews. Especially when Israel became a Medina, was a country in 1948. And look what happened in Europe not too long ago. We're not talking about something that happened 500 years ago. What is it, 65 years ago? Right? 70 years ago? We had a Holocaust. 6 million Jews just died recently, and we have pictures of them. It's not something that happened, 2,000 years ago. Our temple was destroyed. Millions of Jews were killed. This is something fresh that we can see. You look what happened. Similar events happened in the past too. In Europe, everywhere. That the Jews were butchered, Jews were kicked out. Look, you just had it down. And you have pictures and movies of it. In case you didn't believe. And you have people who are still alive that went through it. Witnesses. So why? One of the reasons is Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah, of course, even though it's not so much a problem today, it is a partial problem when dealing with the reform movement. Reform is a form of Avodah Zarah. It's negating, it's detaching themselves from God, from the faith of God. They're not necessarily worshiping an idol, but they're worshiping an ideal. Which is an idol, an ideal. It was a whole different idea that God did not give the Torah. And according to many of them, perhaps He didn't create the world. So that goes completely contrary to our tradition, completely contrary to our beliefs. So where did the Holocaust begin? In those areas where the Tnuat Haskalah, the movement of the Enlightenment, began, which took a toll on Judaism, on the Jewish people. So even though the Holocaust is a more complex topic, and there may be other reasons behind it, of why Hashem brought about a Holocaust, but the fact is that something happened to 6 million Jews that was so cruel and so unusual that it pays to study it. And the place to begin is in the Torah that speaks about why these things happen. And the main answer, the main explanation is because we didn't follow what the Torah says, with the mitzvot. So, that is the simple explanation. Things don't just happen by chance. It's all from Shamayim. So Avodah Zarah was a major problem, but there are other possibilities for Galut. Al Gilui Arayot. Gilui Arayot is immorality. What does immorality do? Immorality, the Kabbalah tells us, brings about tremendous tum'ah to the land. Now, Avodah Zarah also brings tum'ah, by the way, because Avodah Zarah is tum'ah. Murder also brings tum'ah, but Gilui Arayot especially. But titma ha'aretz, it says, and the land became unclean. When we say unclean, we take it, okay, so it became unclean. In other words, it's rampant. It's filthy. Look at all the billboards. It doesn't look right. When the Torah says vatitma, it actually means that the tum'ah is there, something that we cannot always see. And in Kabbalistic terms, what that means is that the sitra achara, the other side, the impure forces, have taken over. How do they take over? Only if they drive out the kedusha. They can't just take over. They drove out the kedusha. The kedusha, we said before, this place, this land, is sensitive. It couldn't take it. It left. The tum'ah drove out the kedusha, so the tum'ah becomes the new bosses of the land. But titma aretz, you might say, so what? People don't understand what it means. It's a very Kabbalistic concept. When tum'ah takes over a spot, it creates a vacuum in that spot as though the Shekhinah is not there. And that is why the word Chilul Hashem comes from the word Chalal. Chilul Chalal. Vacuum. In other words, a void. On this place, God forbid, the Shekhinah was removed. Shekhinah envelops the whole world. And here it was removed because of the tremendous amount of sins. So it weakens. Not that Hashem can be weakened, but it's like his influence is weakened as a result of those ma'asim. And if the Shekhinah is removed, guess what happens? Hashem says, oh, you removed me? I remove you. So see, again, it's a midah keneged midah for the Gilui Arayot, for all the immorality. What about shfichut damim? Murder. This one is interesting. Murder is bad. We know that. The Torah tells us that, if a man sheds the blood of somebody else, his blood will be shed. At the very beginning of Bereshit, we see that. Cain doing it to Hevel. We see that it's very serious. Murder. But murder should cause galut. Why? What's the connection between murder and galut? So there's a very interesting pasuk in the end of Parshat Mas'eh in Bamidbar, talking about murder. The Torah tells us be very, very careful not to accept kofar, not to accept any compensation, bribes. A murderer has to be put to death, or he has to go to the city of refuge if he's killed by accident, if you recall that. Ir miklat. Then the Torah talks about be careful, lo lachnif ta'aretz. Lachnif literally means don't flatter the land. Flatter the land. I assure you that most people who read through these few psukim did not clearly understand what the Torah says. It says, Ki adam yachnif et haaretz. The only way to restore peace, the only way to atone for a sin of murder is bedam shofcho, through the blood of the one who caused it to spill. In other words, by putting to death the murderer. Death penalty. Premeditated murder we're talking about. So, but what is this words, Ki adam yachnif ta'aretz, that the blood will flatter the land? So the different commentators give different interpretations. But the simple idea between yachnif, even though the word yachnif means to flatter, what do we do when we're flattering someone? Chaplusi. Right? What are we doing? So you could say, well, when you flatter, you are lying. Okay, that's true. Flattering is a lie. But that's not really what is happening. You're making the guy feel good in a sense. Right? But it's not true. In other words, the flattery itself is not true. Now, what happens if the person who's being flattered is a wicked man? Then your flattery to him will only make things worse. You are, instead of correcting him, instead of doing something to get him away from his evil deeds, you are flattering. That means you are saying it's okay. So the flattering ultimately corrupts the person. Unless it's a good flattery, of course. One pirush could mean, therefore, because the blood, spilled blood, has the potential of destroying the land, of corrupting the land, of ruining the land. Because that's ultimately what the flattery does. Unless you take care of it. The dam, spilled blood on this ground, how will it destroy the land? Well, why was man created? God created man. Hashem is proud of his creation. Man is the crown of creation. And Hashem says, I put you here into this world, le'ovda u'leshomra, to take care of the land, to develop it, and to preserve it. If somebody murders a human being, that's one of the most destructive acts there are on this world. This land is not used to absorbing blood. Did you ever see somebody put blood in the ground? I mean, you put water. The land does not want to receive the blood. It receives the human being after he dies, but that's not blood. So, the dam, if anything, yachnif et haaretz. If the blood is shed on this ground, and it's not supposed to be absorbed into the ground, it ultimately destroys the land. It's one of the most destructive things that for the world, for Earth, is murder, because the world is created for this purpose, to establish it, to populate it with people who will contribute to it, and to kill somebody who's supposed to be active in bettering this place is ruining it. So because murder is one of the most destructive actions on the Eretz, it's called Adam Yachnif. It ruins it. Even though the word is flattery, but in the context over here it means it's so destructive that Hashem says, I have to remove you from here. It automatically causes the people, the inhabitants of that land, to be expelled. So let's go back to the refugee problem in Syria. Is it Avodah Zarah there? Is it Shfichut Damim, Gilui Arayot? Well, Shfichut Damim we see there is. We see the tremendous amount of murder there. Wanton murder. People, the government doesn't care. And it's all tribal. You don't belong to my group. You don't deserve to live, Chas v'shalom. So that is why these three are so serious, and why they ultimately result in expelling the inhabitants of the land, but especially Am Yisrael, because the land is sensitive. Eretz Yisrael. What about Balashmatat Haaretz? Shemitah. Now we know from the various commentators that one of the reasons why Am Yisrael Gala Me'artzo was expelled from the land is because we were not careful with mitzvah Shmitat Haaretz. What's Shmitat Haaretz? That on the 7th year we don't work the land, we don't plow the land, right? There are certain halachot, certain mitzvot that apply on that year. And what are we doing by observing that mitzvah? This is one very important mitzvah that demonstrates clearly our total emunah and bitachon in Hashem, our faith and reliance in God, because we're not working for an entire year in the field. This is an agricultural society. To not work an entire year is economic suicide. But we say, no, Hashem promises that on the 6th year He's going to give us 2 or 3 times as much, double, triple, enough of the Yevul to last us for the 6th, for the 7th, for the 8th, until we have enough to grow and harvest on the 8th, 9th year. So when Am Yisrael observed that mitzvah for an entire did not work, you know what Kiddush Hashem came out from that? It showed our strength in our emunah and bitachon. This is incredible. This mitzvah was an ot and mofet, the rabbis tell us, was a miracle. It was a sign, I should say, of our tremendous connection with God, a tremendous faith in Him. So by not doing it, what are we showing? That God is not the boss of the land, we are, Chas v'shalom. Because when we observe the mitzvah of Shemitah, we're saying God is the balabait. He's the owner, and He told us not to work. It's His. And if you don't observe it, you're saying, oh, He's not the owner. I decide. I work whenever I want. Oh, really? You think you're the owner of this land? Well, not for long, because you're going to be kicked out of this land. So once again, we have another midah keneged midah, measure for measure, that is connected to the land from a different angle. This one because we think that we are the balabait, we are the owners. You're not the owner. Hashem is the owner. Hashem gave it to you, and Hashem can take it away from you. Such a beautiful mitzvah that shows so much emunah. To not do it, Hashem says, well, you're going to be disconnected from this land. Not only will you be disconnected, the land, once you're not there, will have time to rest, like you should have given it the rest back then, and you didn't. Now it will rest for a number of years until Hashem decides you're coming back home. So 2 things are happening. The Jew is driven out, plus the land gets to rest all the years that it did not rest. The last portion of the Mishnah tells us, goes back a little bit what we were saying in the previous Mishnah. Remember, in the previous Mishnah we spoke about Dever, the plague. So this last portion of the Mishnah tells us that בארבעה פרקים הדבר מתרבה. There are 4 periods of time that dever, the plague, and all kinds of diseases, will increase. So first of all, why does it say here increase? Just say, during 4 periods it comes. No. It increases. That means it's more intense than at other times. Alright, so in order to understand this last portion of the Mishnah, let's briefly go through the 7-year cycle. What happens in the 7-year cycle? We have 7-year cycles, and then we have 7 cycles of the 7-year cycles. So we have year number 1, 2, 4, and 5, where besides Truma and Maaser that we give, Truma is a portion that goes to the Kohen, usually about 2%. Maaser, from whatever is left over after we give the Truma, 10% to the Levi. So besides the Truma and the Maaser of the crop, years 1, 2, 4, and 5, we take Maaser Sheni, a second Maaser, which we eat in Yerushalayim. Okay. It's holy. Years 3 and 6 of this cycle, not 1, 2, 4, 5, but 3 and 6, there's something called Maaser Ani. Besides Truma, besides Maaser, there's Maaser Ani. Another 10% of what's left over goes to the poor. Not Levi, not Kohen, poor. Then we have the Shemitah. There's no work done. On top of that, we have all kinds of Matnot Aniyim. Gifts that go to the poor. Leket, Shikha, Pe'ah. For example, the corner, the edges of the field, is a mitzvah to leave to the poor, let them come and get a little bit of the edge. It's a certain percentage that we leave from the corners where it's accessible to the poor. We have leket, that fell off, that dropped. You don't pick up every little grain. That which dropped. Leave it to the poor to come in when they can to collect it. Then you have shichecha, whatever you forgot. As long as it's not major bundles, that also belongs to the poor. And in the same way that these mitzvot apply to a field, they apply in a vineyard. There's different names over there. One is called peret, and one is called olelot. Incomplete clusters of grapes, leave to the poor. Little grapes that fell to the ground, leave to the poor. These are all kinds of gifts to the poor. Okay. Now, so we're dealing now with a situation where Chas v'Shalom, a good number of people, doesn't mean all, are not fulfilling their obligation in this important mitzvah of tzedakah. It's tzedakah, however you look at it, it's a help, whether it's with food or with money, whether it's a Kohen, Levi, or with Saniyim. So there are a good number of people that unfortunately are very weak in this area. So the Mishnah tells us the Barba'a Perakim Dever Mitrabe. The Dever that we said, the terrible plagues that will affect people, kill people, people die. They are increased ברביעית, בשביעית, במוצאי שביעית ובמוצאי החג שבכל שנה ושנה. They are increased during these 4 periods. In other words, the timing is important here. Timing of every event is important. And what's the significance of an increase during these 4 times? The 4th year, the 7th year, Motzei Shevi'it, the end of the 7th year, and Motzei HaChag Shebechol Shana V'Shana. Right after the holidays of every single year. Why? Why is there an increase or potential increase of the plague during these periods? B'Revi'it Mipnei Ma'asar Ani Shebashlishit. What needed to happen on the 3rd year? You had to give a second Ma'aser to the poor. And if it wasn't given, then on the 4th year, which is after the 3rd, there will be an increase in the dever, in the punishment. Why? That was Revi'it. What about Bashvi'it? With the Ma'aser Ani Shebashishit. On the 7th, because of the Ma'aser Ani that you had to give in the 6th, right? We said the 3rd and 6th. So immediately on the 7th, there's an increase in the plague. But Motzei Shvi'it, right after the sabbatical year, Mipnei Perot Shvi'it, because of the fruit of the Shvi'it. In other words, what should have happened in the 7th year should have left the fruits for anybody to gather, because on the 7th year, whatever fruits grow We're not supposed to keep them all for ourselves. Take what you need and the rest leave. And when the holidays are over every year, because we did not leave them the matanot of the aniyim in the field usually would be around the harvest time, which is around the holiday time. Right? So therefore, if they were not left, then chas v'shalom, the devil would increase right after the holidays. Now let's understand what's going on over here. Why an increase? And why during this time? Well, during this times we understand why. Because it follows what they should have done and they did not do. An increase, a simple way of understanding an increase is Hashem wants to lavlit it, as we say in Hebrew. He wants to emphasize it. He wants to make it clear, send a clear signal. You know what? This is not just because of some weather patterns or some, some not enough rain or some other problem that brought about this illness. There's an increase right after the 3rd year, right after the 6th year, so people could see, oh, it's right after this. And there's an increase. It's all of a sudden, it stands out. It's an alarm sounding. So the increase is a way of getting the message out. Look at the timing. Look at the increase. This is not your regular. This is more than the usual. And it's right after those years, so you should be able to figure it out. Hashem does not send you a cryptic sign. He sends you a clear sign. Why did Hashem bring it a little earlier? During the 3rd year, during the 6th year. Why wait till afterwards? This shows how Hashem is kind. The Erech HaPayim, He's tolerant. Maybe they'll do Teshuvah by the 4th year. Right? Hashem could have brought it in the 3rd year. You'll suffer. You didn't give them. The poor were suffering without food for so long. No, Hashem says, I'll wait for you a little bit. So that's why it's a little bit later. It's pushed off, it's postponed. Just to finish off this last Mishnah here, this last portion of the Mishnah definitely put a big emphasis on gezel from the poor. But in general, gezel, stealing, is a tremendous avon, tremendous sin. The rabbis tell us that many times geshamim ne'etzarim mipnei gezel. Rain is stopped or rain is reduced, diminished greatly because there's gezel, people stealing from each other. There was all kinds of tzarot, all kinds of troubles occur because people steal from each other. We see from Dor Mabul, the generation of the flood, we see from many, many incidents in our history where gezel was a big problem. Now, why does this gezel occur? Why do people steal? Rabbis tell us that there's different kinds of yetzer hara, evil inclinations. For immorality, there's also laziness, there's anger, there's all kinds of yetzer hara. The rabbis tell us this biggest yetzer hara of all, the most dominant one, is the yetzer hara of money. You know, the green stuff. Mula. Flus. Right? Kesef, mammon. Yetzer hara shel gezel, of stealing, of cheating. Doesn't mean armed robbery. It can mean any kind of money. Make money. You know, the yetzer hara is the biggest in the area of money. People will be mechalel Shabbat, God forbid. They'll work on Shabbat. They'll do all kinds of things and they'll try to justify it, of course. They don't want to have a guilty conscience because of money. Money drives people crazy. It's the biggest yetzer hara. And therefore the rabbis tell us that Rov ha'olam nichshal b'zeh, rubam begezel mi'ut b'harayot. The majority fall or are weak in this area. A lesser percentage in the area of immorality. Gezel affects a lot of people. That's why in this week's parasha, Parashat Yitro, you wonder, Yitro tells Moshe, by the way, when you choose judges to help you, they better be anshe chayil yirei Elokim sonei batza, that they hate money. Where do you find such people that hate money? It's rare. People who are not affected, money doesn't talk to them, you can't bribe them, but you need people like that who are not corruptible. So it's a very, very big yetzer hara. And I'll share with you a fascinating story that happened about 20 years ago, give or take, that I heard. The Rabbi Eliyahu, who just passed away, Zechet Tzadik Levracha, made a deal with his wife while she was alive. whoever leaves this world first should come to the other one in a dream and please reveal to them, why is Mashiach not coming? Wow, it's a great question, right? Mm-hmm. Why is Mashiach being delayed? So please, we'll do each other the favor. Whoever goes first, come to the other in a dream. Ask permission to come in a dream and tell the reason. She passed away first. She didn't come to him in a dream. For some reason, she came in a dream to one of his students. Please go tell my husband that the reason, one of the reasons at least, that Mashiach is being delayed is because there is gezel amongst the religious. And it was not only is there gezel, which is a problem, but even amongst those who are religious, observant, even they are unfortunately conducting themselves in a very inappropriate way. And it was being, guilty of gezel, stealing, all kinds of ways of stealing. So we see how serious this is. Now, here we're seeing that people who are careless or who do not do as much tzedakah as they should are being affected with dever. In other words, with disease, with death. Why so much? The reason for that is because the opposite is also true. We find from many pesukim that when a person is careful with tzedakah, he has so much shemirah, so much protection from heaven, right? Tzedakah tatzil mimavet, it protects one from death. If the tzedakah is such a powerful mitzvah that it actually offers protection from disease, from death, it's a protection from Shemayim. If there's a major, terrible thing happening to the world or to a country or region, economic, whatever, and a person was very, very strong in tzedakah, he will be spared. Either they'll put it into his mind to sell the stock, to move out. His tzedakah, his money will be protected. Maaser protects one's wealth. Tzedakah is a big protector. So in the same way tzedakah is such a protector, if you don't do it at all, you can imagine the consequences of it. It's just the opposite. It acts as a tremendous accusation against the individual. And he tends to, God forbid, not have any protection from heaven and being exposed to the elements. And when disease or economic collapse happens to an area, he's swept away just as much. And he may go even first. Why will he go first? So the commentaries explain over here that if during a time of judgment, famine, plague, disease, right? It's a time of judgment when people are suffering. If a guy still doesn't give tzedakah during that time, it's worse. Save your life. Don't you see what's happening to everybody? Save your life. Now do tzedakah, at least now. If then he still doesn't do it, it's like an open rebellion against God. He suffers first, or he suffers more. Because during this time you should even do a little bit. I mean, something. But people, seeing that they're losing their money, they stop doing tzedakah altogether. Oh no, I can't. I have to protect it for myself. That is why people have to be told that tzedakah is not just being nice to the poor. Look at the word tzedakah. What does the tzedakah come from? Tzedek. It means to be just and proper. If Hashem gave somebody a lot of money, it's because He gave it to him as a pikadon. He entrusted in him, use it right, feed the poor and the destitute. That's why you have more than them, not because you deserve it, because you were entrusted. You be the distributor. So therefore, if the man doesn't do it, doesn't act properly, he could lose the money, he could lose his life. It's a very, very serious avon, therefore, to be mit'alem, la'alim ayn, in other words, to look away from the poor, to ignore them, and say, let the government take care of them. Let them go on welfare. It's your responsibility. You were given the money. Okay, let's just finish off with why people fall into this trap. We said that there's a Yetzer Hara, of course, but how does the Yetzer Hara make people fall into this trap? We know it's serious. Right? A lot of times it happens because of jealousy, envy, and competition. In a community even a Jewish community, where people see others living according to a certain high standard of living, they want to be like them. They're making large weddings. They want to make a large wedding too. And guess what happens? Because of the pressure, they don't have the money, They borrow. And if they can't borrow, they steal. And if they borrowed, they don't pay back. I know many stories of people who wanted to make a Brit Milah or Bar Mitzvah. They didn't have the money to make a big wedding, a big feast. They borrowed the money with the intent of giving it back. Yeah. I don't think they had an intention of giving it. That's called gezel. Make it in your backyard if you don't have the money. Do you know how many women have gotten their husbands into trouble because they basically wanted to get some jewelry and they knew the husband can't afford it, but they had to compete? You should never know from these things. I'm not blaming you. There's a lot of, but there are women who force their husbands to buy them things because everybody else has it. I also want this. I also need to have it, but we don't have the money. Go borrow it. And if the guy couldn't pay back, that's gezel. So there's all kind. Gezel doesn't necessarily mean that you take it. He borrowed it. There's a story that's brought down in the Me'am Lo'ez where somebody had a factory and he was very, very, very anxious to buy the house next door to it. It's close to his factory. The guy didn't want to sell it. So what does he do? He thought of a plan. One day the guy who had the house needed some money. He says, I'll lend you the money. I'll lend you the money. And I'm sure, I think whether he did it with interest or not, I don't recall. But after a while, the guy couldn't pay up what he owed him. He defaulted, and the guy took over his house. That's a form of gezel. Because the way it was done, the way it was planned, was to get a hold of this house that he very much wanted, that the other guy, poor guy, that was the only thing he had. And because of this debt and because of this big loan, he couldn't pay it, and he lost it. You know how many kinds of incidents similar to that happen today too in the real estate market, where people do all kinds of monkey business, and they take from those who don't have so much. They take advantage of them. That's all gezel. Anyway, the Zohar therefore reminds us that when you have a poor man knocking on your door, just think of it as God sent you a gift. It could be that by giving him tzedakah, that tzedakah will save your life. There could have been a car accident the next day that this individual could have been involved with. But because last night he gave tzedakah, his life was spared. A poor man comes and knocks on your door. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. You're having dinner. Be careful. It's a gift, Mishamayim, the Zohar says. And there's a saying, I think that Zohar also brings down the saying. It's Gemara, I don't recall where. A door that is not open to the poor will eventually be open to the doctor. Did you understand what that means? In other words, you could have given that money to the poor, but since you did not, that money you will end up giving to the doctor, Hashem Yishmor, God forbid. A door that was not open to the poor will eventually be open to the doctor. One way or another, the money has to be spent, so spend it for tzedakah. That is what David HaMelech reminds us, Ashrei maskil eldal b'yom ra'ah yimaleteo Hashem. Fortunate is an individual who's maskil, who has brains, who uses his head when he sees a poor man. He knows how to deal with him. Fortunate is the one that knows how to do it. Why? Because b'yom ra'ah, if there's ever a yom ra'ah, a bad day either for him or for the world, for the area where he's in, yimaleteo Hashem. Hashem will protect him, will save him. So there was fortunate are these people who know how to deal with the poor properly. Because when their time comes and they are in some sort of need or some sort of difficult situation, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will save them. Okay, I think that does it for today. I think this is a very, very important idea that has to be constantly repeated and told to our kids, to our friends, to everyone, to be very, very careful with other people's money, because it's a big yetzerah. And the tremendous rewards for those who give tzedakah and those who are sensitive to the plight of others, even during the hard times, especially during the days of Mashiach, when we're told that the great merit of Gemilut Chasadim, those who occupy themselves in Torah and kindness, that will save them from Milchemet Gog uMagog. It will help them. It will allow them to see Mashiach. It will allow them to escape the wrath and the suffering of Gog uMagog, which does not only necessarily mean war. Gog uMagog. It means all the turbulence, all the pain that people will have during this time, all the anxiety, all the uncertainty. People who are doing tzedakah and chesed are, God willing, B'ezrat Hashem, going to be in the group of receiving a Mashiach. I think so. I really think so. Even though there are people who were big Balei Tzedakah who already passed away, and they didn't see Mashiach, we have a tradition that certain people will get up first in Tchiyat HaMetim. And they are the ones who mourned for Yerushalayim, and it could be those who did a lot of chesed too. We don't know. All we know is that this is a tremendous midah HaChesed that we have from Avraham Avinu. This is the midah of Am Yisrael, that we're Baishanim, Rachmanim, Gomlei Chasadim. We're bashful, we're kind-hearted, we are compassionate, right? And God forbid, somebody who lacks any one of these three in its entirety, is indicative that maybe he doesn't have Jewish blood running through his veins. Ad kedei kach. So it's something to emphasize always, especially that we know that it has tremendous segulot, tremendous rewards and protection in Olam Hazeh and B'ezrat Hashem in Olam Haba as well.